Life and business can be easy, but us silly humans love getting in our own way. My name is Nico Rapclis, and I've had a wild journey. From releasing traumas that I held on to for decades, to playing college athletics, working with multi-million-dollar brands, having a spiritual awakening, and now coaching incredible humans navigate their inner and outer world. The Just Grow podcast is my outlet to share and help others with life and business. After investing north of $100,000 into my personal and professional development, the Woo plus Do formula is what has served me best. A healthy combination of mindset, energetics, consciousness, spirituality, self-healing, and discovery, matched with a high-level strategy, principles, focus, optimization, and accountability to help you be, do, and have everything that has been placed in your heart. This podcast is for the impact-driven entrepreneur that is finally ready to start thriving internally and externally. Welcome to Just Grow. Yo, what's happening, my friends? Welcome to the Just Grow podcast. Super pumped to have you here on this particular episode. This is going to be an interview with my good friend, McKenzie, Englund. Now, when we filmed this episode, McKenzie and I have known each other for a week or two. And since then, she's been an integral part into my growth and my journey in becoming the best version of myself. She's helped me navigate relationships. She's helped me let go of energies and traumas that I've been holding on to for a long time. And she just has this very unique way on how to grow as a person and become the best version of yourself, because she all does it through the lens of science, neuroscience and physics, because that's what her background is in. So absolutely incredible interview, and you're not going to want to miss any second of this, so make sure and stick around all the way to the end. Before we jump in, I want to let you know about our most recent live podcast episode. It was absolutely incredible. We had a packed house, great people in the room, just a great vibe and great energy. So if you were there, we're pumped that you made it and you're able to really experience the value that Just Grow really offers. Now, our next one will be on March 29th. So when tickets are available, it'll be on justgrowpodcast.com. And then we also are releasing a group coaching cohort for the Vision Accelerator. So if you're looking to get activated, you want to clear those subconscious blocks, you want to clarify who you are and where you're going, and ultimately just become activated and have a clear picture on where you're going so that you're not lost in the shuffle of life, then the Vision Accelerator is perfect for you. So if you have any interest, we're taking only about like 5 to 7 people. So if you have interest, go ahead and apply. The links will be down in the show notes in the description. But that's really it. So thank you for listening to that. And without further ado, let's jump into this interview with McKenzie Englund. Welcome, everybody, to the Just Grow podcast virtual edition. We don't do this as much previously, but now here we are. We're doing it with the lovely McKenzie Englund. She is a mindset coach. She's very much into energy, Reiki, and just helping women specifically become the best version of themselves so they can really flourish in this world and in their business. So really excited to have you on. And just pumped. I said, we have not done too many of these virtual ones, but this just gives us the ability to connect with so many amazing people that are not local to Arizona. So welcome, McKenzie. Glad to have you here.
Thank you so much, Nico. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah. So, I mean, we connected, I think that was last week. And I don't, honestly, I told you this, like, I don't do too many like connection calls these days. I'm just very intentional with my time, but I do tend to follow my heart and just listen to my intuition. And there's just something about you and your energy that I was like, I think it's fitting that we jump on a call. So we hopped on, and pretty instantaneously we realized that we were on the same energy wave, on the same frequency, and just had a lot of alignment. So yeah, I think a great place to always start with these, that I tend to start with these at least, is your story, how you really got into what you're doing now. And I think you have a pretty unique story that I haven't heard from too many people, that you're much more into the medical side of things, and then you've transitioned into a coaching business. So we'd love to hear a little bit more about that, and then just kind of the context of this as we're moving forward with the Just Grow podcast. We talk about the woo and the do. So especially because, our audience is a lot of impact-driven entrepreneurs. So yes, there's the spiritual side, there's the mindset, the energetics, and that stuff's vital, and it's the foundation, in my opinion. But then it's also the strategy, the tactics, the marketing plan, all those things. So we can dive into all different areas, but that's kind of just like the umbrella that we talk about a lot here. So yeah, would love to hear a little bit more of your story.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to my childhood, I grew up in a really small farm town in the Midwest. My town in specific had less than 1,000 people. So everybody knew everybody. I graduated from a school with my graduating class was like 62 people. So it was a very intimate experience. But with that, I also felt like I was just this fish in a tiny little fishbowl that really was starting to outgrow it, and I needed to get out. So from a young age, I knew I wanted to be a doctor, was always really good at math and science, and it just made sense to me. And at that point, I was very much like focused on going to school, going to be a doctor, graduated high school. I ended up going to college out in Minnesota, in Rochester, Minnesota, got my bachelor's degree. And if you're familiar with the area, that's actually where the Mayo Clinic is. So I knew it was going to be like a really good place for me to set myself up to go to Mayo's medical school. So did my undergrad. I interned and I worked for Mayo, and then was ended up I ended up being published by Mayo doing research with the medical school there. So I basically had like everything set up for me to just knock it out the park.
Hmm.
And graduated, and then shortly after I moved out to Jersey City, just outside of New York, like 2 months before COVID hit. So took my MCAT, was applying to medical schools, COVID hits, and all of a sudden everything is like hit on pause. And that's when I started to, for the first time in my life, like pick my head up and look at the world around me. Because previously I was somebody who was like, all right, I've got 4 years of undergrad, 4 years of medical school, 4 years of residency, like 2 years, like
Wow.
just keep your head down
Yeah.
and do your fucking work. Am I allowed to swear?
This is a free speech platform.
Okay, good. Keep your head down, do your work. Like eventually when we hit that finish line, like we'll be able to lift our heads back up and we'll be exactly where we want to be.
Hmm.
And so when COVID hit, it was like that forced moment where I lifted my head up and I was like, what the fuck am I doing? Like,
Hmm.
this is not necessarily the industry that I want to go into. There's a lot of limitations, and just things that as I was going through my undergrad, I realized, I was really more interested in the psychology of things and how the brain worked. And, um, when I learned about like the placebo effect, I know you and I have talked about this, like you've got a heavy background in finding The Secret.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have that story. And I never found The Secret. Like that didn't hit me until probably a year after COVID.
Mm.
But I learned about the placebo effect in college. And that for me was like, oh my God, if our brain can make us sick and could also heal us from terminal illnesses, why are we prescribing all these medications? Why are we not addressing like the true source of what creates within the human body? Like it's a tool. And so I was in Jersey City, had this massive awakening,
Yeah.
and it just shook my world. I became a spiritual person. It's actually really crazy. I had my grandma who had passed, and I couldn't go to her funeral because of COVID and my
Mm.
MCAT, but she came to me in a dream, and I'm telling you, like, I was like so science-based, kind of an atheist at the time. And so when this
Mm.
happened, she came to me in my dream. She touched my head. And when she touched my head in my dream, like I immediately woke up because I like felt something touch my head. And it was one of the scariest moments. I woke up and I was just terrified because I didn't know what happened. But that was essentially the moment that created a whole new world for me. And I knew that I had her as somebody who was like very much so on my side, guiding me. And I just kept having this feeling of like, med school is not it. Like, this is not it. You're not going to be happy. I didn't want to be working 12-hour shifts. I didn't want to work every single holiday. I
Mm.
didn't want to be doing on call, types of things. And So around that time, the guy that I was dating and living with, he got into a company and was like learning how to trade. He was really good at the marketing. And I was watching him do this while I was still studying and doing all of my work. And that's when I was kind of exposed to like personal development, and it lit my whole world. I was like, this is the coolest shit I've ever heard of. And these are people who actually understand that like you have to work on yourself and acknowledge the mind to become the better version of you. So I got really heavy into personal development. I built the business alongside of him, and I functioned as essentially like a performance coach
Mm.
to hundreds of traders in the market. So a lot of what I was doing was educating them on how your brain works, right? But also to how to balance out your mindset, because trading and being in the markets, it's like 5% strategy. You know, like you can master the markets and that's awesome. But until you can master yourself and your emotions, you'll never be successful and you'll never be profitable. So that's where I got into that. That's how I started coaching and,
Mm.
built that business. Absolutely loved it up until I realized that I had kind of done the same thing again, where I stuck my head down, had a goal in mind, and just trudged my way through. Where eventually I lifted my head up and I was like, you know what? I actually really don't like my life. I don't like the person that I've really become in this. I don't like the people that I've surrounded myself with. And it was just another wake up call for me where I knew that I needed to start fresh again.
Mm.
And so I left my relationship, I left my apartment, I left my business, and I had no plan. I actually was trying to move to Miami for a while. Didn't work out. I was hitting roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. Then I tried moving to LA for a while and I was just hitting roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. And I was like, okay, well, I don't really know what's next for me, but I know that I'm not going to go back to Wisconsin because it was like March where it's fucking freezing here in Wisconsin at that time. And
Yikes.
I'm not a snow girl. Like I will put up with it for my family. I will do it for the holidays, but I love the sunshine. I love the beach. And I was like, all right, well, let's just go to Mexico.
Mm.
And this was the first time I ever booked like a solo international trip. And I was fucking terrified.
Yeah.
I was so terrified. But I booked a one way to Mexico, planned on being there for a month. And then basically from there, I just started meeting people. Like I like to call them earth angels because they're
Mhm.
people who guided me. Like I connected with someone, had a conversation, and it opened a new door, or it led me to the next conversation or a new person. And essentially what happened is when I was in Mexico, I met a business coach who was not a retired, but like he was a doctor who quit and left the medical industry. So we had like good things in common. And he was telling me about biohacking and all of the things that he was doing. And there was a convention in London like the following month.
Mm.
And I had asked my angels for a sign. I was like, please, if this is meant for me, like I feel really fucking good about it. But like, also, what am I doing? I'm in Mexico. I don't know this guy. Am I going to go to London to see these people? Like, I don't really know. Got the sign, booked my ticket, ended up like, I'll summarize this real quick, but I spent 3, 4 months, my whole summer out in Europe, traveling around to different countries, living in different countries. From there, I was like, well, we may as well go to the Middle East, see what's up over there.
Might as
Hung
well.
out in hung out in Tel Aviv. You know, got to experience that. And then one of my biggest dreams was always to go to Bali. And I was like, okay, we're 6 months into this trip. My family's really starting to worry about me. Like, Kenz, are you ever going to come home? Are you ever coming back to the United States? And I was like, you know what? I'm more than halfway to Bali. Like, let's just go see Asia. So that's what I did. I then went and lived in Thailand for a month, Vietnam for a month, like Bali for a month. Like I tried to see as much as I could and live as I could, because the whole time I was traveling, I wasn't just learning about the world, which first of all, like if anybody has the ability to travel, I so recommend it because you will learn
Hmm.
so much when you expand your world like that. But I wasn't just learning about the world, I was learning a lot about myself through it. And during this entire 9 month time span of travel, I ended up graduating from DCI, which is Dharma Coaching Institute. tried a psychedelic for the first time, went into the experience with the intention of being able to leave my previous business, woke up the next morning, had the entire download, wrote out my entire program, signed my first client by like 3 days later, and basically launched my business and let that journey kind of flow through me. And I feel like I got to witness it. Like I was just very much so in the passenger seat, watching myself, like this inner being inside of myself that I'd never seen before, guide me through. And so that's essentially what happened to get me into this new business that I have now, which continues to evolve as I evolve, of course. But yeah, that was like essentially my story. And, that was about a year ago. And this last year, I spent really building my business. I spent a lot of time in Puerto Rico, which is my favorite over here on this side of the hemisphere.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, I mean, that's my story. Medical background, tried out trading, got into coaching, and let it evolve from there.
I love that. There's so much to comment on that.
Yeah, I talked for a
You're
long time.
taking notes the whole time. Um, well, first, one of the things that stuck out to me was when your grandmother came to you. Like that gave me chills. I feel that. I have a
Hmm.
really interesting story with my grandmother as well. And I find it really interesting how much of a shift you had just immediately. And there is something really to be said about putting your head down
Yeah,
because that's what gets results. Like you just focus, you don't veer off the lane too much. And that, like, when people get distracted, that's when there's a lot of challenges because they're like, I kind of want to do this and this and this and this. And then they just get
yeah,
all spread thin. So there's something to be said about that. But, also when you feel something and you just have this inner knowing, you run with it. And
yeah.
yeah, it was just cool to hear that part of the story. I also agree with traveling and putting yourself in uncomfortable situations. I went to college out of state by myself, and I say that
Hmm.
was like the first time where I really pushed my comfort zone, where I was like, oh man, this is scary. But like thinking
Yeah,
back to that, that was such a pivotal time for me. Like if I didn't do that, I don't know if I would have had the balls to like move a different state after I'd finished college and to all the
yeah.
other things that I've done. So there's something to really be said about that. But I guess probably part of that story I'd like to lean into a little bit more. I thought it was really cool on how you got into the coaching space
Mm.
because, I think there's different ways to look at the coaching industry. And sometimes I find myself maybe getting a little frustrated with it just because I see so many people that say, I want to be a coach. And then it's
Yeah.
just coaches helping coaches who coach coaches that coach. And it's just like,
Yeah, it's gross.
but I like what you said, and I agree with that in terms of the trading because I've been in the trading space a little bit here and there, and I was one of the people that understood the mechanics, but it was just a mess when it came to like keeping your mind straight and your emotions in check and not like betting your whole account. And so um yeah, there's so much we could probably talk for about 12 hours straight.
Yeah, no,
Um
for sure.
I mean, so let's even like lean into where you're at now. I think that would be a good place to dive into because you said you're evolving and your
Hmm.
business is evolving. And I think that's a really good place to talk about. I don't think too many people are talking about it these days because I keep on hearing from a lot of the business gurus and people that are smart and successful and doing really well. They say you have to just focus on one niche, one avatar. And then I recently started hearing more about like, you're always evolving. So why wouldn't your clients be always evolving? And why would you them into a box when you don't want to put yourself into a box? So like,
Yeah.
where did that come from where you were like, I can evolve with my offer. I can evolve with my clients as opposed to just like I'm the subconscious reprogramming person. I never veer out of that.
Yeah. Yeah. So my first, like I said, the way I started coaching, I was already in like the mindset space, but it was always like branded as trading and as making money and things like that. And there is a lot of power in keeping your head down, but I didn't have the balance of like the discipline. I was incredibly disciplined and like nobody could fuck with me and my goals. But the problem is at the time I didn't know myself well enough to know what my authentic goals actually were because I hardly knew myself looking
Yeah.
back at it, like it's awesome to have a goal and you can say you want to make X amount of dollars and do Y to help people, but unless it's like really truly part of your soul mission, what I found is that I just continued to burn myself out over and over and over again. And so for me, I realized, with my first coaching program, I love this for me because I was able to take my pain and turn it into passion and power. But you know, leaving my relationship that I was in, it was something that I never really expected. Like I kind of thought that that was going to be like my end all be all.
Mm.
And so I went through like just a crazy time and I was the one who left, but I was really hurt after everything that had happened. And so my first business that I launched and my first program was called Date Yourself because I
Mm.
wanted to help women learn to date themselves so that they could become secure within themselves and they didn't have to be codependent in relationships. And it was powerful. And I served so many women doing that and made a huge impact. But eventually, what had happened is it just became something that I matured past
Mm.
and I didn't really align with it anymore. And what I do when I'm working with people is I'm connecting like one on one. And it's hard for me to connect with you if I'm no longer in that place anymore. If
Mm.
I'm no longer like really passionate about what's happening because I'm miles ahead now focusing on something else. So at first, I was using neuroplasticity, placebo effect, like all of my tools from my undergrad to heal from a breakup. And then I was healed and I was still working with women who were like, yeah, I'm like still sad about this. And I'm like, girl, you're gonna be fine. Like,
Mm.
you're so good. More of my potential and like more of my power is going to work with you when you're not looking backwards at what could have happened, what would have happened, XYZ. Like, I need the woman who's ready to like look forward and dominate and kick ass. Like,
Mhm.
that was more so the energy that I was in. And so that's when I launched my glow up program, which was the transformation. And that program was phenomenal as well. Like I really was able to do some insane things with a lot of people. And so then with that, where I'm at right now, my new program that's coming out is called Metamorphosis.
Mm.
Um, and that's like my whole branding. My branding is all Monarch. So it's all about the transformation and just having a complete identity shift. But it's not so much about just serving women who want to glow up or want to have like that type of situation. I found the clients that I was attracting were not actually women coming out of relationships anymore. They were entrepreneurs who had either gone stagnant in their business or burnt out in their business. They were single moms who didn't know how to balance their life and still take care of themselves.
Mm.
They were people who had like low confidence and because of that they stayed really small. Um, and so I just realized that, as I was growing, it felt way better for me to be in a very authentic place where I could deliver, and that was where I was delivering the best from. But that requires me and my program and what I do to evolve as I evolve so I can still stay within that like energetic realm and on the same level as my clients that I'm attracting. And so I'm really excited about my new program because I've essentially been doing the exact same thing just under different titles.
Mm.
And now this last like this new program that I have, there's no this is where you are, this is where you want to be. It's just like here's the deal. If you want to change your life in any way, like we've got to start with your mind and anybody who understands that, like I'm the girl for you because you're not trying to fuck around with XYZ like cosmetics or people who want to be motivated to go to the gym and they're going to get the new gym outfit. Like, cool. How motivated are you 2 weeks from now after you've watched it a couple times and you've worn it a couple times? Like,
Mm.
those band-aid fixes don't actually make a difference because you haven't changed anything about you. So, with my new program, a lot of it is just come as you are because you know that you're settling in some aspect and you want to grow bigger, and I will help you do that. There's no there's no definition to it. It's just transform your life.
The thing that I sense from you, and I feel like this is probably a big reason on why we connected in the first place, is it's just an energy.
Mm,
And I would be curious, even kind of like one of the questions that was popping up in my mind, because again, our whole thing here is the woo and the do. And a lot of times the do really is just kind of the marketing plan. I mean, I know there's a lot of
Hmm.
aspects of business, but I would
Right.
say like if if the business owner out there that is like quote unquote struggling or just not where they want to be, if they just knew how to market better and attract clients better, then their business would be a lot better.
Hmm.
And so lately for me, I mean, I've been in marketing for a long time. I've done a lot of different avenues, work with some bigger companies that just do like sold paid advertising that are not more about, not as much as like building that like heart brand. But I've
Hmm.
also been leading much more into that, like the energy that you put out is really what you attract. So I'd be curious to hear what you have to say about how you go about attracting clients because you said before you're like, at first I was attracting people that had just come out of a breakup, and then you started attracting people that were more in the glow up phase, and now you're just attracting people that are like bosses that want to level up.
Yeah, yeah. So we're gonna do like a little science lesson if you're up for it.
Amen.
But basically, I'll keep this really simple too. So within your brain, we've got neurons, right? Your neurons are your brain cells. And when your neurons are firing, imagine it as like people lined up across a football field playing the game of telephone, right?
Okay.
And so they're passing this message all the way along. That's how the messages travel. But when you break it down on a very like chemical level, there's different chemicals that are happening and different action potentials that are happening. And essentially, what happens is the same way a message travels through a string of neurons is the same way a current would run through a wire. And so when you blend neuroscience with physics and biology, essentially what we've got going on is every single thought that you have sends out a magnetic impulse to the world. And in physics, like we know that that emanates and it projects up to 4 feet outside of your physical body. So quite literally, like you physically are the wire with the current flowing through it, but the current is being created by the thoughts that you have.
Mhm.
So, like I said, my branding was all about like, heal your heart, have the glow up of your lifetime, blah, 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 blah. Like my marketing said what it said, but I was attracting different people because my magnetic impulse was attracting different people.
Mm.
And it's because like I said, I had evolved so much past where I was when I first launched my business that it just no longer reflected where I was. And because we are magnetic and like individuals and human beings by nature,
Mhm.
I just started to attract different people. And that honestly was what woke me up to it with a new reflection of like, okay, actually, I think I can play a much bigger ball game and work with much bigger people because look at what the fuck I'm doing.
Mhm.
And that's what really changed it for me. So it was just like allowing myself to see the growth reflected back to me that I had actually completed without acknowledging it myself. If that makes sense.
Mm. So I'm curious about this then. It sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but is it like you like made the decision that you wanted to work with people out of a different caliber, and then you just put that energy out and you started attracting that in?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't really like that side of like manifestation and energetics and stuff. Like I think a lot of coaches and people with different messages say how you have to make the decision and it's not going to happen until you make this like one definitive decision where your body's just going to like align with it. Doesn't make sense. Like on a biological level, our cells are constantly overturning, right? Like some of them live a day, some of them live up to 7 years, but like we're constantly changing and evolving.
Mm.
So it doesn't make sense that one idea you have or one decision you make is going to change your entire biology. It's a process. We
Mm.
are evolving. So it's constantly happening, which is why you'll receive signs before you're even aware of what you're actually like heading into, right? Like with marketing or coaching or whatever your background was, it's like you probably were starting to see other people around you doing what you wanted to do or having conversations that were leading to you to XYZ. And it's because that evolution had already started
Mm.
before you were probably even consciously aware of it. So I think it's important to make the decision, yeah, and hold yourself to it, of course.
Mhm.
But it's not just a one and done. And I think a lot of people
Right.
get really down on themselves or frustrated or feel like they don't know how to manifest or attract certain things because they make the decision or they write it down and they execute on it, but like they're just not in alignment. Like alignment is a huge part of it. You have to be able to match what you're biologically putting out. And that
Mm.
doesn't come down to one decision. That comes down to a lifetime of events, conversations, evolution happening on a biological level where you just become that person. And that's when you're attracting it. It's a
So
lot,
what would you
it's a lot
what,
more effortless than you think.
sure. What would you say to someone that asks the question, how do I get in alignment?
Mm. I think alignment happens when you first take time to isolate yourself.
Hmm.
I think a lot of people are out of alignment because we see what the people around us want. And this is something that I fell victim to, especially in my small town. Like I had always kind of been an outlier, but I was still a very small thinker. And it's because that's what I had. And so, I had these desires and things like that. And it wasn't until I fully isolated myself, like literally cut my friends off, told my family I love them, but like I needed some time by myself
Hmm.
and started doing like really deep work to just get to know who I was. Because that alignment is something that only you can know
Hmm.
and you'll feel it. Like as soon as you get yourself into alignment, you'll feel when things don't fit. That's why, if you do go through the spiritual awakening, a lot of people work on themselves and then they go back out into the world and they're kind of like, oh, this friend feels really like icky to be around. Or like, I just had this conversation and I feel really drained because of it. Like, that's misalignment. So
Hmm.
you kind of fall into it, but you have to know what your base level looks like before you can start introducing other things back into it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that because I've done my fair share of solo trips,
Yeah.
and sometimes I feel like I'm a little bit different than everybody else, but it's nice to hear that other people do that as well. And I think it is really valuable to just have time and space for yourself, to ask yourself the questions. Because I mean, you
Yeah.
think about it, if you're hanging out with, I heard this on a podcast and it definitely shifted my perspective. Oops, I paused.
Yeah, your face is, but your audio. There,
That
you're
was like
back.
the worst freeze frame ever.
You're back though.
Um, so what he said is like, oh, I'm pausing again.
Your audio isn't. I think it's just your video.
Okay. So he talked about how do you get to know somebody, right?
Hmm.
You spend time with them. How do you get to know yourself? You spend time with yourself.
Yeah.
And that's not like spending time is not sitting next to each other watching Netflix.
Mm-mm.
Spending time is not sitting next to each other scrolling on social media. So if you take that lens and you say that with yourself, if you want to get to know yourself, it's not watching Netflix. It's not scrolling on social media. It's sitting with yourself because if you're with anybody else, you are giving at least a piece of your energy to them. And
Yeah.
if you're by yourself, you can pour everything you got into yourself. You can ask yourself the questions that you haven't asked yourself. You can do a lot of thinking in those times.
Yeah.
Even I make a point to do what I call thinking time once a week.
Mhm.
It's like an hour of time, and you could call it just journaling, but it's just like just thinking through your thoughts of like, oh, that's a good idea, or like, what is some of these things I haven't processed or worked through? And yeah, it's super valuable to take that time for yourself because otherwise you're always going to be a little disconnected from yourself and therefore out of alignment. Therefore, you won't really attract the clients that you want, and then everything is just kind of astray. And so it all
Yeah.
comes back to knowing yourself. What
Yeah.
what would you say? You hear the phrase a lot, deep work. What does that mean exactly to you?
Deep work.
Or
I
doing the
feel
work?
like, yeah, yeah. Oh, and that's actually a book that I love. Like I will plug that real fast. It's called How to Do the Work by
Oh,
Nicole LePera.
okay.
She's known as the holistic psychologist on Instagram. Phenomenal book. Like it literally transformed my life. I will 100% recommend that to people.
Okay.
But one of the biggest things that I do with my clients is in the first third of my program, we're in that isolation phase doing the work. And
Mm,
so what that looks like for me with my clients is we're essentially what I've done is like I've condensed my Date Yourself program into the first 3 weeks.
Mm,
So a lot of it is, learning to use your love languages towards yourself. What are they? How do we work it into your morning routine every single day?
mm,
What is your attachment style? How do you respond to people in your life? How do you respond to your goals that you have?
mm,
What's the interactions there? But then also, too, I think a really big thing that's going to hold people captive is basically the life that they grew up with from 0 to 7. That's when our subconscious is being developed, right?
yeah,
So a lot of that is working through like either mother wounds, father wounds, whoever you grew up with as your main primary caretaker. You have to be able to look at that relationship and wake up to the fact that these individuals were just also human beings who did the best that they could.
yeah.
And I don't think anybody is ready to be a parent up until it hits them. And even sometimes after that, they're like, yo, I don't know what I'm doing. And I actually had that experience. I was a bonus mom for a couple of years, and I was like, it just exposed so much to myself, like to me about me, because I was realizing certain parts of me were coming through and I was like, oh my God, I see my mom in this. Or oh my God, I see my dad coming through me. And like these were things that I didn't necessarily like to see coming through me because of specific reasons of what I grew up with. But until you learn to look back at that and feel the feelings that you needed to feel back then and connect with your inner child and do that work and honor that individual and talk to that individual and support them and love them and guide them and uplift them, you're going to remain trapped in a lot of the hamster wheels of things that happened when you were like 3 years old. And that's why too. So this is just another like psychology thing, but the age in which you have a traumatic experience, and trauma can be described as dropping a toy off of your high chair while you're eating,
Mm,
or it can be the more intense things that we see and hear and, some people experience, but it doesn't have to be like this massive thing. And I think that a lot of people don't necessarily realize that. But when you do experience something that is traumatic, you actually freeze at that age in the behaviors that you're having. So let's say you're like in your 30s, right?
mhm,
Okay, yeah. So in your 30s, you are a grown human being, right? But let's say you have a wound around money. If you were to, I don't know, have some sort of big bill come up and it was to trigger you, you actually would turn back into the 5-year-old or the 7-year-old who experienced something that went through that. So you no longer have all the tools and awareness and logic that you've accumulated over the years because that's not relevant. It's the
mm.
7-year-old who experienced it, and it's the 7-year-old who's going to behave through your 30-year-old body and create the reaction that you're going to have. Like you don't evolve past that until you healed through it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So whenever
So,
we get triggered, we're just like immediately catapulted back to when that trauma was
yeah.
first presented.
Yeah. And that's why I think too, like when you do get triggered, it's so important to just allow yourself to witness it. Like, here's another biology hack and things that I work with my clients. But, let's say, evolutionarily speaking, when we have a fear or a trauma response, most of the time it's because we had to survive something, right? Like if a lion was chasing you, like you needed to be activated
Yeah.
to go run away from this lion,
Right.
right?
Yep.
And now in today's world, it could be finances, it could be relationships, it could be XYZ, anything that triggers you. But biologically, what's happening when you're in those moments is your blood leaves your brain and it goes to your legs, it goes to your arms, and it actually makes you dumber. So if you're getting triggered about your finances or you have a big business decision come up and you're triggered in that moment, you're actually not able to think as best as you can.
Mm,
Your blood is literally in your limbs. You're biologically ready to run away from the lion. And so what we need to do instead is calm down, re-regulate our nervous system,
mhm.
get the blood back to our brain before we make a decision or before we make a move, because you're really just not doing yourself a service by functioning from that state of being. Like brain gets dumber, body gets stronger. Cool. That's awesome if we need to run. But we're not physically running and it's just a problem that we're encountering day to day, that's not actually like a really good state to be problem solving from or making decisions from.
Not, it's not advantageous to be dumber.
No, no. And like anger, the blood will go to your jaw. So like you'll feel your jaw tense, you'll feel your hands clench. That's where your blood is. That's where your energy is.
Yep.
It's just it's not in your brain. It's not you at your highest functioning or your highest self.
That's wild that you brought that up about it's in your jaw. I just learned that literally like in the last few days because essentially, and you probably know this, is that it's basically like getting your jaw ready to,
Bite.
yeah, bite and like defend yourself, which is
Yeah.
crazy. Like,
Yeah. And evolutionarily, like it makes sense. We needed to be able to do these things to survive. So that's the natural phenomenon that's going to be when we're in that survival mode, right? It makes sense biologically, but a lot of people don't know that. And so a lot of people will have something happen, they'll get in an argument with their significant person, and when they
mm,
get pissed off and they get angry, all of that energy, all of that blood is in their jaw and they might mouth off. They might say something that they don't mean. They
yeah,
might, get really aggressive with their hands or whatever it is. And it's just like, if we could calm ourselves down enough to keep the blood up in our brain so we can properly think and regulate and like have a thought process behind something, our reactions change completely. So I think a lot of the work is just learning how to regulate your nervous system, learning the difference between what's a response biologically that's serving you and when it's not actually serving you, and learning to function from a place of true integrity in the appropriate moment. And sometimes learning to say, I need a minute, because that's okay too.
mm. What do you have any go-tos in terms of regulating your nervous system? Or maybe even like a routine that keeps you in a good place?
Yeah. So every morning, what I do, I'll wake up. Um, I don't typically like to eat too much in the morning. I think like a heavy meal slows me down. It like just makes me feel heavy.
Mm,
But what I'll do is I start with breath work. I'll do Wim Hof every single day. I
mm,
love that man. So I start with Wim Hof and then I will go into a meditation. And then I typically afterwards will do just some tapping, like EFT tapping to remove whatever I need to remove. Sometimes I'll do self Reiki if I feel like I've got, one of my chakras clogged or something like that. But breath work is huge, huge, because at that point, your body's not trying to think anymore. It's just focused on getting enough air to pull you back into like survival. So everything gets shut out. And that's when your nervous system gets most regulated because there's not all of this external background noise going on.
yeah, I agree. I love breath work. I have a good friend that introduced me a couple years ago, and it's been a major staple in my life.
Yeah.
And especially like the longer ones, like if I'll go to like, I do my best to make it to Sedona once a month. And then I'll do like a 50-minute one up there on top of the rocks and everything. And I usually just have like this huge release. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's powerful. I even went to one this past weekend with a good friend of mine, and she was more on the somatic side. And I hadn't done as much as that, but it allowed me to release some
Yeah.
emotions that I've been holding on to. And it was incredible. And to think like I'm pretty consistent with breath work, and to think that I had these emotions bottled up and a big somatic event was the catalyst to help me release that. I just think about how many people like never do breath work and like what kind of emotions they're holding on to and how long they've been holding on to it.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a real thing. And I think one of my first experiences with it. I mean, I learned about breath work when I was in my neuroscience classes, because it's just scientifically like proven to help you. There's methodology behind it. But one of my biggest experiences was when I was out in London at this biohacking convention. There was, I want to say it's like Noan. It's like he's a really popular
Mm.
breathwork specialist. And their whole branding behind it was that it was going to feel like a psychedelic experience. And I was like, all right, well, I had tried like one at that point, the one that I launched my business off of. And I was like, that was really fucking cool. So like, I'm down to try it. I've got nothing to lose.
Yeah.
And it was the most intense experience I've ever had. And it was the most vivid visualizations that I had ever had. And it's just so cool to see how you can activate different parts of your brain and your body because, again, you're so pulled into your physical vessel because you're focused on surviving. You're focused on that oxygen and that regulation. But I love too that you said, like, there is a huge side of the somatics behind all of it. But I also think too that as humans, obviously we have our ego, and our ego keeps us blind to a lot of stuff, which is why I think coaches always need coaches. And you should always be working with somebody because you can't see your own blind spots. Your ego is literally like, nah, we don't have anything wrong with us. Like, we're good. We've got other problems to solve, right? And also, that's been your normal default. So you've never really experienced what it would be to have less tension between your shoulders or in your hips or whatever it is, wherever you're storing that. So to have somebody else and their energy and their presence around you, there are some really magical things that happen when someone else can just be in the same room as you because you might pick up on their energetic field or they might pick up on yours. And if you've got somebody who's trained in it, like they can assist you in moving that energy and releasing those things. So it's powerful. It's powerful to do alone, but it's powerful to do in a group or with somebody else too.
I 100% agree. Because I do it all the time by myself. But when I go to an event, or I don't know if you ever experienced this, but my friend has done some one-on-ones with me. And
Okay.
wow, like I've never had such releases when it's just like focus is on completely on me and just catering to everything and making sure that I'm like breathing enough. Because, I, at least for me, sometimes in events in a group fashion, like, I don't know, I just like kind of stop. I don't like
Mm,
go as hard as I want, or I kind of get distracted, or I kind of like blast off and I forget about stuff. But like when you're at a
yeah.
one-on-one session, then it's like he just keeps you accountable to like, all
Mm.
right, let's keep it going, keep it going,
Yeah.
let
Yeah.
go.
Yeah, no, the experience that I've had when I did it in a group, honestly, I wasn't going to do it because I was like, what the fuck is this? Like, I'm not doing this in front of other people. And when I did it, they gave us like headphones that had the audio going through it, but we were also blindfolded because I know that if I were in that environment, I would have been consciously aware of the fact that there were other people around me and it would have held me back. I
Mm,
know that. I know that that would have happened. So there are different things that you can take to allow yourself to drop that ego and be really vulnerable because at the end of the day, again, human potential, like you can limit that or maximize that. That's all in your control. But it depends who's in control, whether it's your ego or your inner child who's scared or whoever it is that dictates what you're going to get out of it. So yeah, that was my experience. And the blindfolds were everything because I wouldn't have done it without that.
interesting.
Yeah, which is actually really like interesting to think about because I am an adventurous person, but I think there will always be a degree to every human being that we somewhat care about the people who are around us and the
Yeah,
image that we uphold.
I 100% agree with that. To um, and I've just heard it from so many different sources where people say like people care about what other people think. And
Mhm.
when people say that they don't, like, oh, I just care what, like, I don't, I think that's so hardwired on us as human beings. Like, yeah, you can work yourself out of that a lot, but I
Mhm.
think it's hardwired in us. I mean, I always look at things back to tribal times, and where
Yeah,
that comes from a tribal standpoint, is that if you did something stupid that got you kicked out of the tribe, that meant certain death, like
yeah.
high likelihood of death, because you're
Mhm.
alone, you have lack of resources, you're not going to survive. And so when
Mhm.
that's hardwired into our brains, like, and someone says, like, I don't care what Susie thinks about me, like, yeah, you do.
Yeah, you do. And it's natural. So like it's okay. Admit that to yourself because until you admit that to yourself, you're not going to allow yourself to grow out of it. But yeah, it's survival at the end of the day. Like our human body wants to survive. Even this is like a really messed up like example, but even people who try to commit suicide, there are parts of them that will try to save themselves just before they die. Like if you were to try and drown yourself, this is really fucked, but like if you were, a lot of people have to sink themselves down with specific weights because you'll snap out of it. You'll want to survive. You'll start fighting to survive just before things happen because that's what we want to do. There's no part of us that really wants to die, even if you consciously feel like you do. So it's really about like tapping into and learning to work with what you've got. You know what I mean? Like if we're hardwired to survive and we grew up in tribes and we've evolved from this version of our species, Let's learn how that works. Let's bring that into our everyday life so that we can function now in the world that we have, but we can use all the tools that we've had for centuries.
This is once again an amazing conversation. I appreciate your time. Um, Maybe just a couple of last questions that I have.
Mm-hmm.
I think one thing that's just really been in my awareness lately is the whole concept of compassion,
Mm-hmm.
self-compassion, and therefore compassion for everybody, no matter what. Like people that have quote unquote wronged you or have slighted you. And it was interesting because this whole last year was that for me. Like the first time in my life, I had some bad business dealings, some relationship stuff, and it felt messy. And
Yeah.
it was painful. It was really painful. But the message that keeps coming through and the thing that's helping me navigate through that is just have total compassion for them. But ultimately, it's just a reflection for myself. So,
Mm-hmm.
what's your take on self-compassion and how do you have any specific practices or perspectives or mindsets around self-love, self-acceptance, and self-compassion?
Yeah. So before I get into this exactly, I want to just address something really quick. When we do have these moments of like struggle, we can just call them struggle. When we have these moments of struggle, oftentimes it's really easy to get down on ourselves and question ourselves because in those moments, it's like, how did I not see this coming? How did I trust this person and not see the red flags? Or how did I end up here at this position? And we blame ourselves and we tend to look at ourselves clearly in those moments. And when moments of high times in life come through, a lot of the times we're celebrating things externally. So we're not necessarily like, yes, this is who I am, right? It's in those hard ass moments where we're like, fuck, this is who I am. Like, how did I not see this? How did I not know this? How did I not do better? And that's the only time that we look at ourselves and we're like, okay, this is me, this is I. So a lot of the times, the image that we have of ourselves and the perspective we have of ourselves comes from those darkest moments. And if you only ever look at yourself and pay attention to yourself and question yourself in those dark moments, you don't have the greatest perspective of yourself. And a lot of us stay trapped in that narrative and in that version of ourselves, which is why other people can see us in such different lights and we don't necessarily get it. Right. But one of the ways that I like to bring self-compassion into what I do in my life and with my clients is using our own love languages as tools to help ourselves.
Hmm.
And these are all just modern tools that we have. You know, love languages aren't that old, but we know that we can hop online, we can take a quiz, and if you've got XYZ as your top ones, okay, well, that's how I know I receive love the most. So how can I learn to supply that for myself?
Hmm.
You know, if you've got physical touch, work in some sort of skincare routine in the morning. If
Hmm.
you've got quality time, sit down and meditate or journal or read a book or just have quiet time to yourself. If you've got words of affirmation, write them on the walls, write them on the mirrors, say
Yeah.
them to yourself. Like use the tools that you have, but learning to love yourself through the ways that you actually receive love the most. That's where I think self-compassion comes in. And it's not easy. It's not familiar. It's not comfortable. It's going to feel really fucking weird at first. You're like, why am
Yeah.
I doing this? But if you continue to do it, eventually we stop thinking about like this part's really weird and we just start to receive it and we feel it and we're like, damn, this just feels really good. And then after you do that practice day after day after day, you start to have compassion for yourself because all the while you've been doing this, you've been receiving those dopamine hits, those serotonin hits. Like
Mm.
we're maximizing and biohacking, brain hacking those love chemicals that will make you do anything for somebody that you love. But now that person just became you.
Wow.
And so self-compassion becomes a really easy part of just your natural habit when you learn to supply that for yourself.
I've never heard of that concept. I mean, I've heard of love languages, but I've never
Yeah.
really, and it makes so much sense. Just apply it to the most important relationship there is.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's easy for us to look outside of ourselves. It's easy for us to love other people. And, you know, the reason that I'm so good at what I do is because I've been in the positions where I didn't have any love for myself. And I was so focused on, finding out my partner's love languages and like figuring out how I could love them even better. And the whole time I was ignoring the fuck out of myself. And of course, then it's like, no wonder I was finding people who were going to treat me shitty or just knew how to take from me instead of giving to me. It's because I wasn't giving from me or giving to me. I was
Right.
taking from me. Like that mirror is so true. But, it's the same thing. Like in my program, I use the love languages, I use attachment theory. Like we learn to apply it to ourselves. And then the same thing too, like with attachment theory, I apply it to people's goals. And, the same way we have an attachment to our relationships in our personal life with other people, we have relationships with the outcome that we want to have and the person that we want to become. So when you can neutralize yourself first by being secure within yourself, and then neutralize your attachment to your outcome that you want to have, it makes attracting it so much easier because you're not running from it and you're not chasing it. You're just here.
Just here.
Mhm.
I love that you said, this is why I'm so good at what I do.
Dude, I'm the fucking best at what I do. Like, I will humbly say that, but I'm so good at what I do. Like, I know that. And if I didn't tell people that, I'd be doing the world a disservice.
Mhm.
But I'm also humble. Like, I really, like, it's
I
not a
know you are.
conceited
No,
thing.
it's
It's
an
just a
energy. I
confidence
feel it.
thing.
It's not like, hey, you're like saying it. And that's what I'm saying is like, you're not saying it because you're like, oh, look at me. And it's coming from an egotistical standpoint. You're like, no, I am. And I've worked really hard to get here. And it hasn't always
Mhm.
been like this, but I persevered through all those challenges to get here. And now I'm a beacon of light that can help other people where I used to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, if you can't say that you're good at what you do, either you have a confidence issue within yourself that you need to work on, or you're working within the wrong field and you're not working with what you've got.
Hmm.
Like if you don't feel like you're good at what you do, what are you doing?
Hmm.
Get better at it for you.
So if someone has you said the first part, if someone has a confidence issue, what would you tell them?
Learn to love yourself.
Hmm.
That's literally always the first step. Use your love languages, shape your morning routine. Just start putting in the work. Like the reps will come and soon it's going to be so effortless. Like date yourself. Learn to date yourself. When you wake up in the morning and you would want somebody to go make pancakes for or, snuggle up on and like say really nice things to, get up, make pancakes for yourself.
Yes.
Give yourself a hug, compliment yourself. Like that was the biggest turning point for myself is like after my relationship, I woke up and it was like, what am I going to do with myself? I don't have anybody to go take care of. You know what I mean?
Wow.
And then I was like, you know what? Actually, I think I really need to take care of myself. And that's where all of that came in. It was just like, if I wanted to go do something for somebody else, I flipped it immediately and made myself go do it for me. And that's
Hmm.
your confidence will come through that. Once you start to value yourself because you loved yourself and you nurtured yourself, you've got nothing to be ashamed of. Like your confidence just comes with it. It's a natural byproduct of valuing the person that you are.
Mhm. That's so good. That's so good.
Thanks.
Where can people find you, Mackenzie?
So my Instagram is the best place to find me. You can find me at McKenzie Englund. And I don't know if you do like the show notes or whatever, but maybe
Yeah,
we can
I'll be
link
sure
it.
and put all your resources down in the show notes and
Yeah,
description.
just because my name is spelt a little funny. But yeah, that's primarily like if you want to reach out to me and get in contact with me, find me there. Otherwise, I do have a website, modernmonarch.com. If you want to check out my programs and my offers and things like that. And then outside of that, like if you want to listen to what I have to say, my podcast is a great resource as well. And that's Metamorphosis by McKenzie on either Apple or Spotify. So,
Cool.
mhm.
Um, Before we do go, I have a final question. I'm really intrigued to hear how you answer this one.
Okay, give it to me.
What are people saying at your funeral?
There was no one like her. I think that that's it. That is everything that needs to be said. There will never like you and me we're individuals. We're not meant to be like everybody else. And
Mm,
the more you try to be like other people, the less significant you are, the less you are. And that's something that I've worked really hard on doing, is becoming me and learning to share me and being authentic in that and connecting with people authentically because of that.
mhm.
And so I think people will miss me because there's just never going to be another person like me.
Mm, great answer. Yeah,
I've
that's
never been asked that before.
really, yeah.
No.
One of my earliest episodes, a good friend, her name is Rocky. She asked me, she's like, if you were at a surprise birthday party and everyone started standing up and saying things about you, like, what would you want them to say? Or what would they be saying about you? And it just like that sparked. And I was like, that's such a cool question to ask, especially from
Yeah.
a funeral standpoint, because then that kind of shows you how do you want to show up to your life? How do you want to be remembered? And it's usually not, hey, drove some sick cars. Like,
Right.
but
She was a
ultimately, like
boss of business.
it shows you how you want to show up to life. And then when you actually step into that, then everything has a natural byproduct that you want.
Yeah. Yeah. No, one of my affirmations is just that I'm unforgettable. And that is something that is a big part of who I am. Like, I want to be unforgettable. I want to not be like anybody you've ever met before. And I take a lot of pride in that. And that's something that I used to really shut down about myself. But now it's like, I'm fucking bomb. So
Yeah.
why would I want to suppress any of that?
No,
Everybody gets to enjoy that if they're around me. So
yeah. Ah, this has been amazing. Thank you so
yeah,
much for your time and your energy and all your wisdom and knowledge and how to. It's been a blessing. So thank you for being on. Is there any other last things, anything you want to share with anybody?
I
Anything?
don't think so. I don't think so. This has been amazing. And Nico, like, you create such a beautiful space. Like, your energy is very inviting. So I want to thank you for that too, because it's not every day you have conversations like this and containers like this to feel good and share. And so I'm just eternally grateful because you're somebody who brings out authenticity in others, and that's because you embody it yourself. So thanks for the work that you do and the message that you share.
I appreciate that. I'm just such a big advocate of like these meaningful conversations. I feel like it's like you said, it's a rarity in this world, and I personally believe the world has gotten to the way it has because of the fact that it is a rarity. So I know I
Mhm.
shared my vision with you, and I'll be sharing it more throughout when, more episodes and whatnot. But like that's why I'm so passionate about it, is because I feel like people aren't having these conversations, and that's why we have such a disconnect in this world, and we're so divided, and people are isolated and lonely and disconnected, and it breaks my heart, really. It really does, and I hate
Yeah.
to see it. So be the change you want to see in the world. And in
Yeah,
order to
absolutely.
change the world, it's more about changing my world, because until I change my world, then no, can't really do anything.
Yep. Change your mind, change your life.
Amen. All righty, lady. Well, thank you so much for being on the Just Grow podcast. Truly appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.